Good afternoon. Today is Friday, the 21st of February, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Patrick Henningsen with me in the studio. Welcome.
It's great to be with you, Brian.
And we're also joined by live link with Mark Anderson from what he tells us is a very cold Texas. So welcome to you also, Mark. Now, we're going to get kicked off with a key subject, which is, of course, what's happening around President Trump and Ukraine. Take us away, Pat.
Well, the big rift, Brian, has opened up, as you've heard and everybody's heard. Trump's going in a different direction in Europe on Ukraine. It's created all sorts of problems. This is how the Washington Post is translating this. 3 years after Russia's invasion, Ukraine has to battle Trump. So this is the head columnist here from the Washington Post, Ishad Thaor. And so we're just going to give it a tear emoji because there are lots of tears right now in the neoliberal and neoconservative camps on this. And the thing that they're afraid of, Brian, I think, is this. They're afraid that this might be breaking out. It's something they call détente or rapprochement. And what does that mean? Well, at the moment, we'll just call this the adult table. We'll get to the other tables later. We'll call this the adults table. This is power politics. U.S., Donald Trump, the new administration believe that they should be talking directly with Moscow. And this has everybody completely up in arms, including the British contingent as well, led by Keir Starmer. So here's Trump basically taking a hard swipe at the president of Ukraine. Let's roll this.
But today I heard, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. He was so bad, so pathetic. It's so sad.
It's pretty tough words from Trump there.
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches. And this is what's really upsetting people, Brian, is that the narrative is absolutely collapsing and Trump's basically taking a wrecking ball to the whole enterprise here. And we'll go on here. He released this tweet on True Social and just laid into Zelensky. And this has been devastating, I think, for a lot of Ukraine supporters. Trump wrote that Zelensky was a modestly successful comedian and accused him of having talked the U.S. into a war that couldn't be won. I mean, this is really flipping the script from what we are used to hearing for the last 3 years. And he continues here, and it gets a little bit more hardcore. Trump said Zelensky is playing Biden like a fiddle and called him a dictator without elections. Zelensky, of course, he's referring to there. So he's saying all this stuff out loud that we've been talking about on this program for the last 3 years. And Trump's finally vocalizing this. And I think it's created a real shock right across the establishment and the media as well. And they're scrambling of how they're going to manage the narrative going forward here. And so here's the latest so he's basically giving Zelensky an ultimatum. He says, you better move fast or you might lose Ukraine. What he's saying is what we've said on this program, Brian, is that the longer they drag this charade out, the smaller Ukraine's going to end up being. The less territory they're going to have, the more people that are going to die.
Absolutely.
So, and the counter punch came from Zelensky here. So let's call that the warning shot. And this was Zelensky's reply. He basically accused Trump of living in a disinformation bubble. So he's clearly been talking to the UK contingent on the phone. Said, don't accept Trump's disinformation bubble. Hit back, Vladimir. And basically, he's upset that Trump's saying that Ukraine basically started the war. In truth, Brian, NATO and the U.S. Created the pretext to start this conflict. Zelensky and Poroshenko just went along for the ride. So this has got J.D. Vance, the president's deputy, as well as Donald talking about this, and Trump's not very happy. So Vance has laid in with a warning shot here to Zelensky. J.D. Vance tells Zelensky he will regret bad-mouthing Trump and condemns his atrocities in response to peace talks. So his atrocious response to peace talks. So this is going to shape up to be quite interesting. I think, Brian, they're one insult away from. This is The Art of the Insult. It's Donald Trump's old DVD. When the nickname comes for Zelensky, it'll be, like you did with Marco Rubio, Little Marco or Sleepy Joe. When the nickname arrives, that's basically the
end. That's the end.
For Zelensky. The brand is pummeled and finished at that point. So I think they're all bracing themselves for impact there. So right now you've got a lot of attacks coming in the U.S. The U.S. is very split on this issue. Here's Bernie Sanders. He's the sort of, I guess, the far left, if you will, the Democratic Party. He's an independent, but he's really with the Democrats. But this is what he is saying here. They're sticking to their line. Let's go ahead and listen to this.
It will not surprise you when I tell you that Trump is lying, as he so often does. Yesterday, Trump said that Ukraine started the war. That's not true. Russia invaded Ukraine twice, first in 2014, and then again in 2022. Right now, Russia occupies about 20% of Ukraine. Since Putin's horrific invasion, over 1 million people have been killed or injured. Every single day, Russia continues to rain down hundreds of missiles and drones on Ukrainian cities. Putin's forces have massacred civilians and kidnapped thousands of Ukrainian children, bringing them back to Russian re-education camps. These atrocities led the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Putin in 2023 as a war criminal. Further, Trump called Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator. That's not true either. Zelensky won 75% of the vote in free elections. In fact, his approval rating is higher than Trump's. In the midst of a brutal war, Ukraine's parliament continues to function and free and unfettered political debate takes place.
So I can't begin to count the number of lies that Bernie Sanders just told there in a row. That was like the perfect package of all of the propaganda talking points, including the bit that Ukraine's still a democracy. Zelensky's outlawed opposition parties. He's outlawed opposition media. He's outlawed the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The list goes on, and I could go through and deconstruct everything he said there, but it's really a masterclass in really the propaganda and the tropes, the endless tropes that are being repeated right across the board.
Yeah. Well, propaganda is the key subject, because unless we can see through that, we don't know what to believe, what's true, what's not true. Truth is critical to taking the lid off global politics. Let's just come back on to Trump. I also picked up on this BBC picture of him. A big question mark, because, of course, is everything Trump doing right? Many people want to believe so, because the moment they believe that everything that Trump is doing is right, it means they can switch off. But a big thank you to somebody who sent through quite a long email to the UK column. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we just recognise that somebody took the time to write into us. And here at the beginning of the email, they're saying that basically we need to remember what was happening in Ukraine in 2014 when ethnic Russians were being murdered. And then also the author of this email is talking about all of the billions that have then been poured into Ukraine, while Zelensky has never really progressed a dialogue with the Russians, although we have to say that many people do believe that Boris Johnson was instrumental in destabilizing early peace talks with the Russians. But nevertheless, this email, I think, is indicative of the sorts of things going through people's minds. An amazing figure here, 1.8 million people have been killed, according to the person who wrote the email. We think this is on the high side, but credit to our viewer for recognizing that we're not just talking about assets and land, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, over 1 million, certainly, I think, people killed in Ukraine. This is about real people and the deaths of real people. And of course, the EU has made almost no effort to stop this carnage. They've been doing the exact opposite. So the email goes on because, of course, it starts to talk about problems in this country, that children in UK have been taught to hate their own country and despise its history. Absolutely correct. Pointing out, wherever the statistic has come from, that only 10% of youngsters are willing to fight for the UK now, but certainly children have a very low opinion of their country, and that's as a result of the reframing in the schools. But then the next one is the one where I think we should have some dialogue. Not much time in the news, but we can certainly get onto this in UK Column Extra. And this is saying that essentially all of the major politicians, in UK at least, Major, Blair, Brown, Cameron, Johnson and May, these are useless leaders. And this is something that I would challenge, because are they useless or are they controlled puppets? I rather think it's the latter. But just to keep our eye on the ball, let's go back a couple of years and have a look at Tony Blair essentially spinning policy over immigration. Let's remember how all these events unfolded if you're concerned about immigration into UK.
Thank you very much indeed, Digby, and thank you to the CBI and to the London Business School for allowing me to come and make this lecture to you today. And I thank all of you for coming and listening to what is an important subject. I have to say it's one of those subjects where when you tell your senior civil service that you're about to make a speech on a subject like immigration, they say, what a courageous move, Prime Minister. But there it is. Anyway, here goes. Immigration and politics do not make easy bedfellows. They never have. We need few reminders of what can happen when the politics of immigration gets out of hand. And let us also be very clear that those who warned of disaster back in the 1960s and 1970s if migration was not stopped, who said Britain would never accept or be a multiracial society, have been proved comprehensively wrong. On the other hand, there is no doubt that on the doorstep in local communities, immigration has suddenly become very high in the agenda. Why? It is not, incidentally, an exclusively British issue. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Immigration has dominated elections in countries like Denmark, Austria, and the Netherlands in recent years. Le Pen rose to prominence in France, as we know. In Australia and New Zealand, it has been a central question, sharply dividing the main parties. Migration flows across the world with increased opportunities to travel, and globalization are driving the issue.
Well, there we are. A very smarmy Blair, of course, at his best, trying to indicate that the whole of the migration issue was just an accident. It came out of nowhere. No, the truth is this was calculated policy. And Peter Sutherland, former migration ambassador, the late Peter Sutherland, former migration ambassador to the UN, said very clearly that mass migration was to be used to break down the homogeneity of the nation states. So if we come back on to our viewers' email, this was an ending part of it. We must trust Trump and realise that our politicians, for the typo there, the politicians have created the mess we're now in and accept the deal that he and Putin will agree. Continuing the war will end in all-out war, nuclear bombs and bankruptcy for no reason. Well, I'm just going to say, if we have a look and we do our research, we can see that what's taken place is not accidental. This is a Rand Corporation document, very dark cover, but the headline, the main title is Overextending and Unbalancing Russia. And if you have a look at what they're talking about, it says it's examining non-violent, cost-imposing options that the United States and its allies could pursue across economic, political and military areas to stress and overextend and unbalance Russian economy. But when we get into the document, the first thing it's talking about is providing lethal aid to Ukraine. So a huge lie by the Rand Corporation that it's pushing for peace, when the first thing it does is saying, let's get the weapons into Ukraine, let's increase the support for the Syrian rebels, and we know where that's gone to. Let's help liberalize Belarus. That's not a positive liberation. That's being used as a weapon to break down society, and expanding ties in the South Caucasus to compete economically with Russia, reducing Russian influence in Central Asia, and flipping Transnistria. So these are calculated acts of war against Russia. They're sold in a pamphlet as if they were peaceful means of competing with Russia, but I would suggest that these are calculated acts of war. But if you look at RAND itself, non-profit, non-partisan research organization that provides leaders with the information they need. I don't think that's what's happening. I think RAND is dictating, but here is the complete nonsense of it, because they're talking about healthcare, national security, education, international relations, emerging technologies, and the last line is all in order to make the world a better place for us all. It's hidden in plain sight, Patrick, when you look at this type of document as to what has caused the problem in Ukraine and other hotspots in the world.
Yeah, the RAND Corporation is a sounding board for the U.S. deep state. It has been for decades. But I might point out, just to be even and balanced, lethal aid to Ukraine. Donald Trump was the one who sent first lethal aid to Ukraine. It was even too far for Obama to go. But because they applied so much pressure on Trump with Russiagate and all the impeachment scandals, he felt he had to overcompensate to prove that he wasn't Putin's stooge. And so he shipped massive amounts of lethal aid to Ukraine, and that kind of started the ball rolling. But we need to be acknowledging these things because it's part of the process, I think.
And to be accurate, Now, a couple of little clips here just to emphasize the huge propaganda that Western society's been under. Let's just have a look at this NATO promotion. So if you're just listening in, that was a little promotional NATO video saying that it's a complete myth that NATO's at war with the Russians. We're just there for peace, apparently. Let's have a little look at Ministry of Defence UK and what it's pumped out. There's so many of these, but just to remind our audience of the propaganda we all face. So while Ukraine is being destroyed, infrastructure smashed apart, people can't live their lives properly, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence, we are helping Ukraine rebuild roads, bridges, hospitals. Complete and utter nonsense and propaganda poured into the minds of people in the UK. I'll just end this segment by a little bit of this interview I did with a former CIA agent, J. Michael Waller, where he was talking about the problems with the deep state. People are being broken down and therefore they're reacting, or is this just normal? And yes, the agency is doing something effective by analysing the behaviour of the public to pre-warn of a crime.
If you ever met a lot of these social sciences and scientists and spent any time with them, you'll see that a lot of them fit the same profiles that they're applying to others. They're depressed, they have grievances, they have terrible family troubles, they feel alienated, they're angry. So they're the ones who are diagnosing the rest of the public. And then with the increased rise in, as you're pointing out, the decay of society and the rise in mental illness and the grievances that even normal people will have and the injustices they see in their own government with, say, a two-tiered system of justice where people standing up for their national traditions are being discriminated against and even arrested, while newcomers coming in to destroy those institutions get favorable treatment. Of course, that's going to produce more anger, but it's not the new troublemakers that are going to be blamed and held accountable for it. It's the people who are trying to defend what's always been there, that defend their national traditions, who are seen as the evildoers. What you have, though, when these social scientists come together and make reports the way you just summarized to the Secret Service, is that they're painting a huge segment of the society as prospective enemies. And therefore, that logic demands more and more and more resources to a national security state and a surveillance state to watch everyone before they commit a crime. And this is where you get George Orwell walking right in. And now all of a sudden we become Oceania.
Critical interview, in my opinion, but this very experienced man talking about the breakdown of the intelligence and security services, not only in the US, but the West, to the extent that they're not doing their proper job, and we've got a further attack on our own society. The kids' table would probably be a good place to move on to, I think, Patrick.
We talked about the adults' table before with the United States and Moscow. Well, this is the kids' table. They convened an emergency session in Paris led by Emmanuel Macron. You can see the lovely Darth helmet, Ursula von der Leyen there in the foreground with the new NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and otherwise unimpressive number of people in suits sitting around the table. I believe the British Prime Minister is in the back there, Keir Starmer. So Europe's back together, Brian. This is very exciting. So lots going on at the kids' table. But what's not being discussed is this. And we're looking at the Finnish press here, and we spotted something thanks to our friend in Scandinavia. One of my research cohorts basically found this, and we translated it here. This is from a Finnish MEP. We'll give us a quick translation. The U.S. has given 3 weeks to accept a Ukrainian surrender. This was told to Mika Atola. He is a Finnish member of Parliament for Europe. He said the U.S. has issued an ultimatum demanding that Europe agree on terms of Ukraine's surrender within 3 weeks. If not, the U.S. intends to withdraw its forces from Eastern Europe. Now, that should be on the front page of The Guardian, should be on the front page of The Times and in the BBC, but I've yet to see it, Brian.
It's the wrong message. It's the wrong message, Patrick. Unlikely.
So pretty shocking. So if you see more about this, you know where you saw it first here. And this is the real question here. Desperate measures, the EU increasing defense spending for more war in Ukraine, but for how long? For how long? The EU's now put together a 6 billion euro package for Zelensky to keep this losing war going. Meanwhile, the United States is basically having rapprochement with Moscow, Brian. So if Russia's not a threat to the U.S., how could Russia be a threat to Europe unless Europe wants Russia to be a threat to it? This is the burning question. It's obvious now. The masks are off, Brian. Everybody can see what the agenda is. So that's the question. How long will this go on? That's the big question. And everybody is losing their minds over this. Not least of all, one of our favorites here. This is one of the great tweets of the week. The Jules says, how long before the science changes on this one, Piers Morgan? Vladimir Zelensky is not a dictator, says Piers Morgan. Vladimir Putin is a dictator. Zelensky didn't start the war in Ukraine. Putin did. Hope this clarifies things for anybody who is confused. It's not as if Piers Morgan's ever been wrong about anything before, Brian. He's always on point on every major event. He's uncanny like that. COVID, vaccines, and the list goes on.
He's part of the kids' table. He's part of the kids' table. Mark, let's bring you on screen. And you've been taking a look at the fair and reciprocal plan. So the White House. What are you watching?
Well, the report I gave last week, good day, guys, and listeners and viewers. The report I gave last week, and let's get that first slide up there, dealt with the White House's issuance of the reciprocal plan. And on 13 February, President Donald Trump signed a presidential memorandum ordering the development of a comprehensive plan for restoring what he calls fairness in U.S. trade relationships and countering non-reciprocal trading arrangements. And that plan seeks to correct longstanding imbalances in international trade and ensure fairness across the board. That part is in red for emphasis. And moving on from there, the EU's trade representative, their trade commissioner, made a American Enterprise Institute AEI visit, and that's this slide here. I covered it in real time and took some slides or some screenshots rather that are basically the same thing as photos as if you were there in person. Excuse me. And so that was the 19th of February, that program a couple of days ago. And this notation from AEI, a very active think tank in Think Tank Row there in DC along Massachusetts Avenue, where many of the major think tanks are located. The second Trump administration, they say, has announced and threatened to enact a range of disruptive and broadly protectionist trade policy changes as America's allies and trading partners consider their response. Uncertainty reigns. And then AEI welcomed Maros Sefcovic, the European Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, for a conversation that day, this past Wednesday. And it was in the morning. And later that day, he went to meet with Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, the newly seated one under Trump, and some other officials. This shows the main program presenters at the AEI program Wednesday. Maros Sefcovic, the EU Trade Commissioner, is shown there to the left. And he was interviewed by senior fellow for AEI, Stan Voiger. And we can move on from there. And this is the world trade according to Maros Sefcovic. And what I'm pointing out here happens to comport pretty well with what we were saying earlier today on the news. Just as the U.S. and Europe are at odds over Ukraine, the U.S. and the EU are definitely at odds over trade. And it's really two worlds colliding. It's two philosophies. And this is what the mainstream press, the mass media cartel, just does not report. That it's not a question so much of reaching an agreement on the EU conventional free trade terms, the conventional free trade philosophy. The U.S. is seeking a different construct, a different system, a different philosophy. And that's what I'm clarifying. Now, on this one, the EU, let's go back to that slide there because that's the main point. That one there. This is what Sefcovic had to say. These were his main points. The EU is built on free trade among its members. Opening up the world's trade is deeply embedded in the EU's DNA, he says. And he called it the world's largest trading bloc with free trade agreements with 76 countries. 72 of those leading trade countries account for 38% of the global GDP. The US-EU relationship, economic relationship, he said, is the largest in the world. He called it a win-win partnership. Boeing and Airbus are made in the US, but with cutting-edge electronic power systems and fuselages made in the EU. US semiconductor production, he said, depends on EU-made lithography machines. And U.S. battle tanks and armored fighting vehicles, he said, rely on EU-made drivetrains and cannons. And, quote, even the U.S. Mint, get this, uses EU-made high-tech printing machines to print U.S. dollars and prevent counterfeiting. Now, what needs to be pointed out there is the Trump trade philosophy is such where the U.S. would make its own components for printing U.S. dollars. It would make its own components, drivetrains for U.S. military vehicles, and whatever is lacking in U.S. production for Airbus and Boeing and things like that, they would be made primarily in U.S. factories. In other words, the U.S., by all indications, is seeking to manufacture the very things that the EU is making right now. That's the divergence in philosophy. The U.S. is going, apparently, all indications, the U.S. is going for a more self-sufficient nationalistic approach in major manufacturing. So Sefcovic, I think, is looking for something that the U.S. just isn't wholly pursuing. Now, the next day, the Associated Press noted, and I won't read all of this, that hoping to head off a potential trade conflict, the top European trade official, Sefcovic, stressed the importance of active engagement and fairness in a 4-hour meeting with Trump administration officials. And that was later that day after he met with the AEI. He met with the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, the White House National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett, and Jamieson Greer, President Donald Trump's nominee to be the U.S. Trade Representative. And apparently he has not been seated in that position yet. Reuters also reported a little bit on this one. I marked in lighter, more bold letters the main part of it. Sefcovic speaking to reporters after meetings on Wednesday with Trump's top trade officials said he saw some willingness on the part of the U.S. to mutually reduce tariffs. But again, I think what he's missing there is that the U.S., again, is pursuing a different systematic or systemic approach. The U.S. wants to replace some of the internal tax revenue with external tax revenue to have the external revenue service more than the internal revenue service, as I've reported on here. So the U.S. wants to raise tariffs, not so much to punish other countries, although some of that will happen sort of as a unavoidable effect, but to actually use that as a source of revenue. Meanwhile, the EU is saying it has almost zero tariffs on something like 70% of its imports into the European Union, which means they're generating almost no revenue with tariffs. So what we're seeing here is just a two worlds colliding, Brian. It's two philosophies, and the AEI think tank and the media is trying to make everything, they're trying to break everything to the saddle or make everything comport to the conventional free trade philosophy that the EU is following, which is the global world trade system that the WTO wants. And that's the one that the Council on Foreign Relations, the major think tanks support. But the US is simply going a different direction. And these other interests and these other actors in this issue are just not acknowledging it. And that's the sum and substance of what's going on, Brian.
It is amazing times with the scale of the differences now appearing. Part of me says we need to watch this very carefully, because much as we've seen the tit for tat politics going on in both in UK between Labour and Conservatives, we're also seeing that has happened in America. Are we now seeing that same tit for tat yaboo politics happening on a global scale to keep the wider public's eye off the steady movement towards a one world government system, a rules-based international order? I think a lot of care needed at the moment as we look at what's unfolding. Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, Brian, what Mark has just shown you there is it signals an end to the post-World War II peace dividend. So where the U.S. used to basically provide defense for Europe and allow open U.S. markets for German products and so forth for the rebuilding and the lifting up of Europe, that's over. Now they're competitors. Now you're in a different situation. And the U.S. has to be careful on this, because they risk Europe facing east. Now, that might not be a bad thing for a lot of people, but the U.S. might come to regret it. So there's pluses and minuses with this change of strategy from Washington. We shall see.
We will see. Well, if you like what the UK column does and you like our news reporting and articles, then please do support us. We rely on your donations and, of course, memberships. And a commitment to the UK column are very important for us. You can do that on a monthly basis or an annual subscription, or you can become a lifetime member, as many people have. You can help us by making a purchase through the UK column shop. And as we always like to point out, that we are able to take a small percentage from health products from Clive to Carl. So if health is your thing, have a look at that on the UK column website. Now, we do what we do to inform, to get out facts and information and as much truth as we can. What we'd like from our audience is to see people sharing the material. We are still blocked on some of these channels, but if you can share and acknowledge UK column as a source, we're extremely grateful. Now, a UK column on location coming up Saturday, the 5th of April 2025. You've got a signpost to help you find the event on screen. We're delighted to have some really top speakers and indeed some old faces back with us. So Patrick, you're there alongside Alex Thompson, Catherine Gunn, more names to be released very soon, but I'm sure it's going to be a very, very interesting event.
Yep.
And I'd just like to remind people that I've started to put out what will be a series of cases about child stealing by the UK state. I know these interviews are very emotional, but if we cannot protect children and we cannot protect our own families from the state, we are in a very, very dangerous position in this country, never mind what is happening between Trump and Ukraine and the European Union. How do we challenge what's happening? Well, that's standing up to be counted. And I want to say that, of course, Public Child Protection Wales, the men and women and men who've been involved in that have done an absolutely fantastic job. 22nd of February, they've got a conference coming up, and that'll be near Newport in South Wales. So have a look at the website. We've also got the Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry, Saturday, the 22nd of February, Lauriston Hall, 28 Lauriston Street, Edinburgh, EH3 9DJ. That's £25 for an all-day event. More people standing up to be counted and challenging the system, and this is so important. And then finally here we've got Sunday, March the 16th, 10 a.m. till 6. We've got the event supporting farmers for food security symposium. So this is very, very important for all of us. And if you're local or can travel, please do go and support that. Now, we're talking about people standing up to be counted, some immensely brave people across the world who've literally risked their life in order to tell us what is happening and to get the truth out.
One of those people, Brian, is an American video blogger who became a citizen journalist during this Ukraine conflict. His name is Gonzalo Lira, very popular on YouTube with a lot of people. And he found himself in the middle of a war. And thanks to our Ukrainian contacts for alerting this, and what we've done is translated this from Ukrainian. A top whistleblower who Zelensky has thrown in prison and charged with treason. His name is Alexander Dubinsky. Dubinsky, while he was in hearing, he managed to get access to his YouTube channel with his lawyers and uploaded a video with evidence of the torture and the extortion of $70,000 from Gonzalo before he was beaten and eventually died from the injuries from those beatings in custody. Now, the crazy thing about this story is, and we'll put this up, this is at 21st Century Wire, the translation, and you'll see there's a link to Dubinsky's video at the end, Brian. But the U.S. State Department had full knowledge of this. Tony Blinken had knowledge of this. Everybody in the Biden administration who should have known knew about this before the worst happened to Gonzalo Lira. He could have been released in a matter of 24 hours and basically taken out of the country. There's Alexander Dubinsky right now. You can go to his Telegram channel, and it will also, some of those will be translated automatically through Telegram. But very brave, and I've got nothing but great things to say about Dubinsky. He's a hero to a lot of people in Ukraine, but he's locked up. A lot of these political prisoners, Brian, including journalists we know, are in prison still because they criticized Zelensky during this conflict. And so this is an incredible story. It's very sad, very tragic, but the truth has come out. The question is, who's going to be held accountable for it? That's the question.
That is the key question, because it seems that there are rules for some parts of society, some countries, and very different rules for others. But we can be sure the BBC is not going to be reporting that story in any real detail at all. So important. What is the BBC doing with people's minds? Well, it's keeping the fear factor going with regards to Russia and China. So we've just got a header slide here. Trouble in NATO Lake, the Baltic Sea, because, of course, we're hearing more and more that NATO has got to put more and more military assets into the Baltic in order to ensure peace. But a couple of days ago, I stumbled across this BBC article. Well, it's more than an article. Putin's secret weapon, the threat to the UK lurking on our seabeds. And this is actually a highly animated article by the BBC. It's got lots of information about how the undersea communication cables work, where they're routed. Very, very glossy, interactive graphics. But of course, the whole point of this article is to ramp up fear in the UK population that it's that nasty Putin and Russia that's going to attack these undersea cables. At the bottom, you see the real quality of the BBC because it jumps from fear over Putin to EastEnders. What more can we say? But if we start to pull this apart, the main message from the BBC was absolutely against Russia. NATO believes, so no facts in that introductory headline, Russia believes Russia is also waging another war, an undeclared one, hybrid warfare that's the target of Western Europe itself with the aim of punishing, look at the language, punishing or deterring Western nations from continuing their military support for Ukraine. And when you get into the article, so-called experts give their opinion. There's very little detail. So this is Dr. Siddharth Kaushal from RUSI, and he says that the Russian military has quite a tiered structure from Spetsnaz special forces motherships for deep sea operations, including former nuclear ballistic missile submarines and titanium-hulled submarines. This is hype commentary. There's no substance in this whole BBC article, and these individuals, to me at least, seem to be brought in just to ram that hype home. This lady was buried about 2/3 of the way through the article, Dr. Camino Kavanagh, a visiting senior fellow from King's College London. She says that states may be drawn to this type of warfare, undersea cable attacks, because there's so much possibility of plausible deniability. And of course, plausible deniability so handy for NATO because it can bury a lot of truth with plausible deniability. But if we look at this lady's work, here is a document that she wrote for the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. And even when we get into the many, many pages of this report, it also says that the risk is very low. They also include reports of intentional state-backed cable sabotage, examples of which still fortunately remain few. So the BBC uses somebody who's actually telling people that there's a low risk, and the BBC ramps it up into a high risk. She goes on, there have also been concerns that terrorist groups could disrupt critical infrastructure, including critical communications infrastructure such as submarine cables. This is the meat of the comment. These concerns even made it into a Security Council resolution, but no such event has ever transpired, at least to public knowledge. So the BBC's article is hype fear that there's going to be Russian attacks on this infrastructure. But when you look at the reports experts who are mentioned in the article have made, it tells the complete opposite story. It's outrageous, Patrick, and I don't quite know how the UK column gets this across to our audience.
Brian, if they put even 1% of the effort they put into this, into investigating the Nord Stream pipelines, this is total gaslighting. This is why our media is getting us to focus on theoretical threats to cables on the bottom of the Baltic. But Brian, because other things were going on the seabed regarding pipelines, okay? And they're emptying the cul-de-sac of propaganda right now in anticipation that that story is going to end up breaking.
Well, it could be peace.
There could be, but with Trump, you never know. There could be an investigation into this, and they'll lay it at the feet of guess who? Joe Biden. Job done. So, Brian, just to validate your speculation there, this is from the United Nations. They conclude here, and this is their special representative, the deputy head of the UN's International Telecommunications Union, has said that fishing trawlers, not Russian sabotage, are responsible for, they're the unseen culprits, if you will, of the underwater cable damage in the Baltic Sea. So this is an official sort of admission there, Brian. So I think the BBC somehow missed that.
They didn't like that story at all. They didn't like that at all, Patrick, because it doesn't meet the narrative. Now, this was also your section. Sorry, Patrick, this was also your section on the...
Oh, this is a big story. Yeah. This is the new FBI director, Kash Patel. He is defending the January 6th political prisoners. He is, again, one of the guys who exposed Russiagate, one of the key people. So he is now in charge of the FBI. Can you believe it? So people are being fired. They're disassembling all of these COINTELPRO programs. This is an amazing thing. This could be the most consequential appointment of the entire Trump administration, Brian, because all of the dirty business that's been going on through successive administrations through the FBI may be coming to an end. But here's the reaction. This is how the Rolling Stone's reporting it. Republicans confirm MAGA conspiracy theorist as FBI director. So we still have this schism in America. We still have the polarization. And Adam Schiff and some of these Russiagate people that really led the hoax for all these years, Schiff is outside the FBI headquarters yesterday morning protesting the confirmation of Kash Patel. And we have a video montage here, which I think is quite amusing, but very, very hard hitting. Let's go ahead and look at this.
This is someone we cannot trust. This is someone who lacks the character to do this job, someone who lacks the integrity to do this job. We know that. Our Republican colleagues know that. The only qualification Kash Patel has to be FBI director is that when everyone else in the first Trump administration said, no, I won't do that, that crosses moral, ethical, and legal lines, Kash Patel said, sign me up. In the first Trump administration, as we are seeing in the second, you rise to the level of your sycophancy, and no one is a bigger or more dangerous sycophant than Kash Patel. This political hack does not deserve to be in this building. He can't do the job. He won't protect the public. He will misuse the resources of the Bureau. He will weaponize it against the president's political opponents rather than protecting the safety, the public safety of the American people.
Adam Schiff is the worst criminal in Congress in the last 250 years. And what broke that we're going to talk about right now is Adam Schiff met with a whistleblower. Adam Schiff went to the podium day after day after day saying, I know nothing about this. We're not going to discuss it. We're going to protect it. And then Adam Schiff, led the prosecution of the impeachment trial in the Senate of President Donald Trump. Talk about someone who was conflicted out of the game because he was part of the hoax that brought Charmella in, manufactured that false accusation, and then peddled it out to the world. And he continued, not surprising, he's lied about almost everything in his life. But now he lied just to set up a presidential impeachment. And that's what I was talking about, these disinformation campaigns. And then he should be investigated because he lied to the world about his interactions with Charmella, who is a whistleblower, and I can't stress it enough, that started a presidential impeachment. Now, your history is way better than mine, but I can't remember the last time a president was actually impeached. It's a significant process and escalation, and it's reserved for the time when it actually shows a crime, not when it shows the manufacture of fake information to show a fake crime. The guy that found and manufactured the evidence with Charmella was the prosecutor in the case against the target of the investigation. That is the ultimate, from a prosecutorial standpoint, conflict of interest. But he knew what he was doing, and he thought he would never get exposed. And I think thanks to, I think it was John Solomon and his fantastic reporting, we now see what I've been saying for years, that I thought he met with him for sure, and it will come out, and it now has.
Unbelievable. That was 2 years ago. Kash Patel did that interview, Brian. He had no idea he would be FBI director. So this is an incredible flip that's happened, and it's going to be amazing how many inquiries, investigations. According to Steve Bannon, they've got them all lined up, and they're actually going to be pressing on all of these things that happened over the last couple of years.
But wherever we look, there's turmoil in politics, and people have got to be very careful looking through the smoke and mirrors to see what's going on. Mark, let's bring you back with us. And you've been having a look at J.D. Vance and leader of the far-right German political party.
Yeah, we've had so much news on Donald Trump, and kudos to Patrick for bringing out Kash Patel. That report's very important. But let's focus a little bit on Trump's deputy a little more, J.D. Vance, the vice president. Of course, a week ago, he was in Munich for the security conference, and he blasted Europe over immigration and censorship of free speech. He's saying they're being unfair and really targeting right-leaning people and political parties. But Vance had the temerity to actually be fair and meet with all four major German political parties in the process, and that included Alice Weidel, the leader of the so-called far-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD. He also met with German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and Chancellor Olaf Scholz earlier in the week in Paris. So I guess Vance is to be forgiven for being even-handed on this. But now a 20-year-old think tank, they turned 20 this year, as I understand it, the Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, picked out not just the German sins that Vance is supposedly committing, but also Romania, according to this headline, is having its hard right boosted by Vance. And riding a wave of disillusion with the political establishment, Romania's pro-Russian right wing has been given an even greater gift, and that is backing from the U.S. That's a 19 February article from CEPA. And basically, Vance used that speech at the Munich Security Conference on Valentine's Day to attack totalitarianism in Europe. And he singled out Romania's canceled presidential election. This is according to CEPA, as he accused Ukraine's allies in the European Union of being the enemy within and afraid of their own people. The vice president said the invalidation of the election in Romania was an undemocratic attempt to deny the voters their choice in Romania. It's hard to think of such language being aimed at Romania by the U.S. at any time since the 1989 revolution, and so on. Bucharest annulled November's presidential election, in which the far-right pro-Russian outsider Kalin, Georgescu, came first. After the Constitutional Court ruled there had been significant interference from Russia to boost his chances. So in other words, Mr. Vance is very critical that Europe is not accepting the election results in Romania. And he feels there's a lot of censorship going on and a lot of hypocrisy going on. We'll look at this next slide. Let's put this one up. I'll just cite mostly what I highlighted in red. Such a victory. This is according also to the think tank that I mentioned. Such a victory would weaken Romania's commitment to NATO and the EU and cause problems for the Western Alliance and the strategic Black Sea region and on Europe's eastern flank, all of which would be good news for Russia, which seeks to roll back NATO's eastward expansion, and Romania joined NATO in 2004. So J.D. Vance is really reading the riot act to the Europeans, again, calling them hypocrites and saying that really they're the ones that are being tyrannical. Don't just look at Russia. Don't just look at the right wing. It's the overall EU globalist establishment that is a large part of the problem. And here's the main points that Vance made, and these are very important. The media is not talking about these points. They keep everything hyper fixated on Vance supposedly giving aid and comfort to the far-right German party, supposedly giving aid and comfort to the Romanian far-right. But Vance had much more to say, as the media has been basically keeping under wraps. He had this to say. Last October, the Scottish government distributed leaflets to citizens whose houses are within safe access zones, suggesting private prayer even in one's own home may be illegal, as Vance told the Munich Security Conference. He also said at that conference that in Brussels, EU commissioners have warned citizens that they'd shut down social media during times of civil unrest if they spot what they define as hateful content. And Vance also announced at the conference that in the UK, the government charged Adam Smith Connor, an Army veteran, quote, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. And Adam Smith Connor, as I understand it, had to pay a very large fine. So he actually was convicted. This next quote from Vance pretty much sums things up. He had this to say at that conference: how will you even begin to think through defense spending related budgeting questions if we don't know what it is we're defending in the first place? Which is a very telling quote, because what he's saying is, if Europe is not going to practice, that is, the EU is not going to practice genuine free speech and be open to all views, and even if they disagree with someone, they defend their right to say it. Everybody gets a chance to speak. Everybody gets a chance to be influential in forming the policies of the EU. If they don't uphold genuine freedom, then what is there to defend? And these kind of sentiments. So much the same could be said of Great Britain or even the United States. If we run contrary to our constitutional order, if we run roughshod over our constitutions, what are we asking our soldiers to defend? Because they take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. If you don't practice constitutional government, there's nothing to defend. That's basically what Vance is summarizing. So back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Mark. Well, absolutely critical points, and it's one of the things that we forget about our constitution and what the proper rule of law is and freedom of speech. If we allow these things to be taken away from us, it doesn't matter whether we live in the United States or Germany or UK or France or any other country. You are essentially gone as a nation and as a community and as an individual. So we need to stay focused on this. But democracy in Germany, Pat, as Germans head to the polls, or not?
As soon as the Munich's finished, the elections are upon us in Germany, in the political scene, the playing field in Europe. All eyes are on Germany right now. Germany heads to the polls. There's Friedrich Merz. That is the anticipated winner here. Future Chancellor of Germany, probably going to be a majority-minority coalition again. But AfD, second biggest party probably by the end of this. But will they take charge? Probably not. But who knows? We'll see what happens in the backroom deals beforehand, before everything's said and done. But so we will have a new chancellor. That's guaranteed in Germany. If it's Friedrich Merz, he's quite straightforward. He's quite outspoken, not that big in difference of policy. He's very pro-Ukrainian, very sort of standoffish with Russia. Yeah. But apparently people are saying that he might get on better with Trump because he's more direct. So that will be an interesting development if that happens.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, Israel, the Middle East.
Well, we have to show you this one because this really just takes the biscuit, Brian, here. This is what happened in Israel just yesterday. Here, multiple bus explosions in Israel put the country on, quote, terrorism alert. Now, there's the picture there, an exploded bus. Brian, what do we have here? 5 explosive devices, 3 empty buses, right? An unidentifiable body. And what does Netanyahu do? After the explosions, President Benjamin Netanyahu's office said in a statement that he had instructed the military to carry out a massive operation in the West Bank, targeting, quote, militant hubs, and has ordered the police intelligence force to step up preventive measures in Israeli cities to thwart any subsequent attempted attacks. Now, Brian, is it just me, or are you getting false flag vibes here?
It's always too easy. An event takes place, and then the reaction to that event, you look at it and you say, yeah, this is very convenient because that was the agenda in the first place. So I must say I am highly suspicious of this sort of thing. And if bombs go off, we had bombs being let off in UK when we had problems in Northern Ireland and with the IRA, and the result was not a massive operation targeting people across Northern Ireland. It was a measured response to try and calm the situation and deal with the people who were the terrorists. So these massive operations, this just says to me that the agenda is really to carry out something strategic, and the bomb is a very convenient initiator of that policy.
3 buses in a parking lot, empty, Brian. I mean, come on. And they've wanted to expand military operations to push Palestinians out of the West Bank, to turn it into a new Gaza. Why? What is the agenda behind this? Well, it can only be this, which is what's known as the Greater Israel Project. This is no longer a conspiracy theory, ladies and gentlemen. This is actual spoken policy by some of the leading cabinet members in Netanyahu's far right. When I say far right, I mean very, very far right, Likudite coalition in Israel. So this is back up on screen. This is Netanyahu at the United Nations showing his map of the new Middle East.
And that was done from my memory, that was done in such a casual, relaxed way. He was there talking, and then he suddenly produced a cardboard map which he could hold up. So this was very unusual way to present something.
Yeah, and he's giving it away. You can see there's no Palestine there. You can see that map. That was before October 7th. He was sending a signal to the world.
What was coming.
He was sending a signal. So no surprise there. So that's unfortunate.
Well, let's. I was going to say let's end on a happy note, but of course it's black humor as always, because that's what fits the reality of the world in 2025. Flu.
That's right, Brian. Well, as people may or may not know, Brian, bird flu season is apparently coming. We're told anyway, get ready. There's vaccines being prepared in factories near you. And this is a meme that was circulating here on Instagram. And we have to give credit to Peggy Hall, the Healthy American. She's got an amazing blog. So she's saying here that the flu symptoms, okay, fever, aches, chills, cough, fatigue, nausea, stuffy nose, sore throat. Bird flu symptoms, however, are fever, aches, chills, coughing, fatigue, nausea, stuffy nose, sore throat. So it's hard to tell the difference between the regular lurgy and the new bird lurgy. Brian, does this sound familiar to you at all?
Well, it all makes sense because it's more fear, isn't it? And the population is to be drowned in fear so that we can be more easily controlled. Perhaps we could just end by saying that UK column team very aware that a lot of people finding it very hard to live in a world where this propaganda and fear is being thrown at them every hour of every day. So we'd like to say, if you're watching UK column, please do share the information that we're putting out, but also take time out for yourself, because the stronger you stay as an individual, the better placed you are not only to defend yourself and your family, but also to take further steps joining up with other people. So look after yourself first. Take time out to relax. Don't let the propaganda get you down. This is the key way to fight this battle. And I'll end with a note that as we started the news today, somebody said in our chat box, one day soon, I want to turn on the news, smile, and hear there is peace on earth. And I'm going to say what a lovely thought that is, but we've all got a lot of work to do in order to root out these appalling people who are using policies to simply cause mayhem wherever it is in the world and whichever country they're dealing with. So we'll end on that news. Patrick, thank you for joining me. Mark, a big thank you to you. And a huge thank you to all UK column viewers and listeners, wherever you are in the world. If you remember UK column, we'll be back shortly with UK column extra. Please join us then. Otherwise, we'll be back for news on Monday. Thank you. Bye-bye.